I stood in front of the house door, the cool autumn afternoon wind seeping through my thin jacket, making me shiver slightly. My heart was pounding, a feeling of excitement mixed with nervousness that I rarely experienced in this busy life. It had been more than 7 years since my mother last visited. It wasn't because we were emotionally distant, but simply because my mother was getting older, her health not as good as before, and the journey from the countryside to the city was long and arduous, filled with exhausting train rides and multiple transfers. My mother, Mrs. Helen Klein, 58 years old this year, often joked that, "I'm old now, traveling is such a hassle." But today she decided to come up, and I was eagerly anticipating every moment. My name is Daniel Klein, 34 years old, working as a human resources specialist at a small company. My job mainly involves handling paperwork, interviewing candidates, and sometimes resolving internal issues. It's not a glamorous job, but it's stable, enough for me to afford this small house. Today, I had taken the whole day off to prepare. I woke up at the crack of dawn, cleaned the house spotless, vacuumed every corner, and even changed the bed sheets in the guest room reserved for my mother. I bought a bouquet of fresh yellow chrysanthemums and placed them on the dining table, hoping to surprise her. These small tasks made me feel warm inside, as if I were making up for the years of separation. My mother had raised me single-handedly, and now that she was older, I wanted her to know that her son still cherished her deeply. While standing outside waiting, I couldn't remember how many times I had checked my watch. My mother's taxi should have arrived by now. I paced back and forth, trying to suppress my impatience. Suddenly, I heard a call from the other side of the fence. "Daniel, hello there." A warm, familiar voice rang out. I turned around, and there he was, Mr. Robert Klein, my neighbor for the past 5 years. He was 62 years old, tall and slender with neatly combed silver hair, appearing with his usual calm demeanor. He lived alone in the house next door, quiet but always polite. Over all these years, our interactions had been mostly casual, like helping each other fix plumbing or sharing a few apples from the backyard. He had never caused any trouble, and I considered him a kind-hearted neighbor. "Hello, Mr. Robert," I replied, smiling politely over the low wooden fence. We started our usual brief conversation. "The weather today is nice, isn't it? The rain all last week drove me crazy." He nodded, smiling lightly. "Yes, it is nice. How have you been lately? Work still going well?" I briefly mentioned the new project at the company about having to handle a pile of recruitment files. He listened, nodding occasionally, then talked about the history book he was reading. Ordinary stories, nothing profound, but enough to maintain a smooth, neighborly relationship. I liked the way he talked, slowly, never interrupting. Then he asked, his voice curious mixed with cheerfulness, "You seem more eager than usual today, don't you? Anything special?" I smiled, not hiding it. "Yes, my mother is coming to visit. She's coming from the countryside. It's been a long time since we met." As soon as the words left my mouth, I saw him pause, just for a split second, but enough for me to notice the change. His eyes quickly scanned my face as if searching for something familiar. Then he swiftly regained his composure, smiling congratulatorily. "Oh, is that so? Congratulations. The next few days will surely be enjoyable." His voice was still warm, but I vaguely felt something odd, like a discordant note in a familiar symphony. Why did he pause like that? Or was it just my imagination? At that moment, the sound of a taxi horn echoed from the end of the street, interrupting the conversation. I turned around abruptly, my heart pounding with joy. The car stopped right in front of the gate, and my mother stepped out. Mrs. Helen, with her silver hair neatly bunched at the back of her head, wearing her familiar knitted coat hugging her body, looked tired from the long journey, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. I rushed out, joy overflowing like a child receiving a gift. We hugged each other tightly, the embrace lasting longer than usual, as if compensating for the 7 years apart. I felt her warmth, the familiar scent of homemade soap mixed with a hint of train travel. "It's been 7 years since we last met. I miss you so much, Mom," I whispered in her ear. She patted my back gently, her voice trembling. "Me too, son. I miss you so much too." I invited my mother into the house first, telling her to rest while I handled the luggage. She nodded, giving a tired smile, then pulled her small suitcase across the yard. I went back to the car carrying the remaining bags, lost in random thoughts. But as I followed behind, I suddenly noticed that my mother had stopped. She stood frozen in the middle of the yard, motionless, her eyes locked on the fence separating the two houses, as if she had just seen something that made the entire world around her slow down. On the other side of the fence, Mr. Robert was still standing there. He looked over, perhaps unintentionally, but when he met my mother's gaze, he flinched slightly, his shoulders trembling. Just for a brief moment, then he smiled a friendly greeting, just like how he had always interacted with me over the 5 years. "Hello, ma'am. Nice to meet you." His voice was polite, without a hint of awkwardness. But my mother, oh my God, her reaction was completely the opposite. Her face turned visibly pale, as if all the blood had drained from her skin, leaving a frighteningly white pallor. The features on her face became tense, her eyes wide open in shock and, I was sure, fear. Her hand gripped the bag handle so tightly that her knuckles turned white, trembling like autumn leaves in the wind. She didn't respond, not a single gesture, not even glancing back. Instead, she turned and hurried into the house, her steps quick as if running, as if she didn't want to stand there for even one more second under that gaze. I heard her hurried footsteps on the wooden floor, then the door slammed shut, echoing in the quiet air. Mr. Robert stood silently by the fence, his smile gradually fading from his face. His eyes darkened, as if sinking into a deep sadness or perhaps regret. I wasn't sure. I followed behind, witnessing the entire scene, my heart filled with confusion and worry. What was happening? I looked after my mother's figure disappearing behind the door, my heart pounding harder than ever. Then I turned to the fence, looking at Mr. Robert. He was still standing there, but now he looked older, more tired. For the first time, I felt that between my mother and this familiar neighbor, there existed an unusual connection, a secret that I completely didn't understand. Why was my mother so afraid of him? Had they known each other before? Or was it just an illusion? I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, then stepped into the house. As soon as the door closed, I saw my mother slump down onto the sofa in the living room. She leaned back indifferently against the cushions, her eyes vacant, as if she had just experienced a major shock, as though her soul was lost somewhere far away. Her face was still pale, her lips pursed tightly, and I could see her shoulders trembling slightly. I called out to her, my voice full of worry, quickly stepping to her side, but she didn't react. I called her again, still silence. My heart tightened. I knelt down in front of her, holding her hand. "Mom, what's wrong with you?" It wasn't until the third time that she startled back to her senses, her eyes blinking as if waking from a dream, then looking up at me. "Oh, son, I'm fine. Probably just a bit tired." But her voice lacked conviction, trembling as if trying to hide something. In response to my barrage of questions, "What happened in the yard, Mom? Why did you react like that? Did Mr. Robert do something?" She just shook her head vigorously, trying to appear normal. "It's nothing, son. I'm just tired. The trip was long." I noticed her hand was still trembling lightly under mine. Her complexion hadn't recovered at all, still as white as a sheet. A feeling of unease began to spread in my heart, like a cold stream seeping gradually through my skin. My mother had never been like this. She was a strong person, having single-handedly overcome so many difficulties to raise me. Why was she so weak now? I forced myself to set the questions aside for the moment, not wanting to tire her further. "All right, Mom, rest. I'll bring the luggage to your room." I stood up, carried the suitcase and gift bags into the bedroom. While arranging the items, putting clothes in the wardrobe, displaying gifts on the table, my mind was spinning. The image of my mother's pale face kept repeating, making me unable to concentrate. Mr. Robert. What was so scary about him? In 5 years living next door, he had never done anything strange. Or maybe Mom mistook him for someone else. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. But the anxiety kept growing, like a balloon inflating about to burst. When I returned to the living room, I saw my mother still sitting in the same spot, not moving. Her eyes followed me, clearly wanting to say something but hesitating, as if struggling internally. She moved her lips a few times, trembling, then stopped, turning her face away as if suppressing her emotions. I sat down beside her gently. "Mom, what do you want to say? I'll listen." After a while, she finally spoke, her voice lowered. "Son, that neighbor, what's his name?" I was surprised, but still answered straightforwardly, "Mr. Robert. He's lived next to my house for the past 5 years. Very kind, Mom. Often helps me with minor repairs." Upon hearing that, my mother immediately became tense, her back straightening like a spring, her eyes darkening ominously. She gripped the armrest tightly, as if that name had touched an old wound. I noticed that excessive reaction immediately, my heart beating faster. "Mom, what's wrong? Do you know Mr. Robert from before?" She quickly waved her hand, her voice high-pitched. "No, this is the first time I've seen him. Never met before." But right after that, she continued, her voice resolute to the point that it startled me. "But he looks very dangerous, son. I advise you absolutely not to have any more contact. If possible, cut off all ties with him as soon as possible." I was stunned by that warning, as if splashed with cold water in the face. Mom didn't know anything about him at all. "Mom, what are you saying?" "Mr. Robert is very gentle, lives discreetly, polite, has never caused any trouble for me." I tried to explain, my voice slightly trembling from surprise. "He always keeps his distance, behaves humbly. In 5 years, I've never had to be wary of him. He even helped me fix the awning when it leaked during rain." But my mother remained firm, shaking her head vigorously. "I didn't misjudge him, son. My intuition has never been wrong. Please follow my advice, even if I can't explain the reason now." Her eyes looked at me imploringly, as if begging. I saw she was tense and tired, her eyes red from trying to hold back tears. I didn't want to argue further, so I nodded in agreement to reassure her. "Yes, I promise. I'll avoid him." In my heart, I thought, Mom is only staying a few days, then everything will return to normal. But the unease had taken root, and I knew it wouldn't easily disappear. The next 3 days passed in an indescribable atmosphere. Mom tried to act as if everything was normal, asking about my work, how the company was lately, any new projects, like a mother reuniting with her son after a long time. She cooked simple family dinners like roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, boiled vegetables, and tidied the house neatly. We sat eating together at the kitchen table. Mom told familiar stories about this person and that in the countryside, about old memories. I listened, occasionally smiling in response, trying to keep the dinner light. But the more I observed, the more I realized something was off. Her cheerfulness was like a thin shell. The smile didn't reach her eyes. There were times when she was speaking and suddenly stopped, as if forgetting what she was about to say. Occasionally, her gaze unconsciously drifted to the window, where the neighboring house lay quietly behind the fence. Each time she quickly turned away, continuing the unfinished story as if no pause had occurred. I didn't ask, not because I didn't notice, but because I felt that if I spoke up, whatever Mom was trying to hold back would burst out right then. Occasionally, I caught my mother standing silently by the window, her eyes directed at the neighboring house, her face tense as if watching something. Then when I entered the room, she quickly turned away, pretending to dust the furniture. "What are you looking at, Mom?" I asked, but she shook her head. "Nothing, just admiring the trees." Throughout her stay here, my mother hardly left the house. The weather was beautiful, golden sunshine, brilliant. I invited her to stroll in the nearby park. "Mom, come for a walk with me to get some fresh air." But she always found reasons to stay. "I'm tired, you go alone, or I'll cook dinner first lest it's late." I found it strange, but didn't insist. The anxiety in me kept accumulating. Every time I looked at the fence, I thought about Mr. Robert. He was still as usual, watering plants or reading books in the yard. But now I avoided greeting him, following Mom's advice. On the day of departure, Mom got up early, packing her suitcase. She repeatedly reminded me, You must stay away from that neighbor, you hear? Don't talk. Don't interact." Her voice was unusually urgent, as if fearing that a moment of carelessness would lead to something terrible. "Mom, I promise. But why are you so worried?" She shook her head. "I just want you to be safe." I saw her off to the taxi in a confused state of mind. She hugged me, whispering, "Remember to call me often." But as the car rolled away, I stood watching the taxi fade into the distance, my heart heavy. The feeling of unease still clinging, heavy and nameless, as if I had just missed something very important that I hadn't yet realized. After my mother left, I tried to return to my daily routine. Waking up early in the morning, brewing coffee, going to work as usual. The HR office job was still hectic, with piles of recruitment files and internal meetings, enough to temporarily push aside the confusing feelings lingering in my mind. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals, watched TV, or read books, trying to brush off thoughts about my mother and Mr. Robert. "It's just Mom's intuition," I told myself, trying to convince my own heart. "She's getting older, perhaps more sensitive." But deep down, the unease still smoldered, like a small flame waiting for the wind to fan it into a blaze. I still occasionally ran into Mr. Robert, mostly over the fence or at the gate. Everything between us remained unchanged from before. Brief, polite greetings like, "Hello, nice weather today, isn't it?" Or, "You're home late from work." He was still calm, smiling politely, sharing trivial stories about his garden or the book he was reading. I tried to keep my voice normal, but every time I looked into his eyes, I remembered the sad gaze from the day my mother left. Did he know something? Or was it just my imagination? A few times, the intention to ask him about my mother's strange reaction that day flickered in my mind. Like one evening when he was watering the plants, I stopped by the fence about to open my mouth. "Sir, when my mother visited, she seemed strange upon seeing you. Do you know why?" But each time I immediately extinguished the thought. "I'm overthinking this," I told myself. "He's a good neighbor. Why drag him into family matters?" Moreover, my promise to my mother was still there, to stay away from him. I forced a smile, shifted to talking about the weather, then went back inside. But the anxiety kept building like a ticking time bomb. Every brief encounter was now filled with suspicion. He smiled, but what was hidden behind that smile? I began observing him more closely from the window, seeing him live quietly, rarely going out, sometimes sitting alone in the yard with a pensive expression. A week passed, seemingly peacefully. I called my mother every day. She shared random stories, her voice sounding more cheerful, but she still subtly reminded me, "Remember to avoid that neighbor." I laughed. "Yes, I'll follow your advice. Don't worry, Mom." Work kept me busy enough to temporarily forget, but then, on a Monday morning, everything changed abruptly. I opened the door, preparing to leave for work, and froze on the spot. Before my eyes was my mother, Mrs. Helen, standing right at the gate with her full suitcase, bags, and personal belongings. Her demeanor serious, as if she had planned this carefully for a long time. She wore her familiar knitted coat, her silver hair neatly bunched, but her face was resolute, without a trace of fatigue. I was so surprised that I couldn't react immediately, my mouth agape, heart pounding. I couldn't understand why Mom had returned so soon, just a week after leaving. Before I could ask, she proactively stepped forward, her voice calm. "Son, I've decided to move up here to live with you. I want to take care of the house and look after you better. It's lonely living alone in the countryside." I was stunned, standing motionless like a statue. Previously, I had suggested many times that she move in with me, but she always refused. "I'm used to the countryside. The city has too many inconveniences." Why had she changed so suddenly now? The events unfolded too quickly, leaving me confused, my mind spinning. But seeing the determination on her face, her eyes without a hint of hesitation, I didn't probe for reasons. I simply nodded, helped her carry the belongings inside, and quickly rearranged the bedroom for her, changing the sheets, clearing the wardrobe. In the first few days, the two of us lived together quite peacefully, carrying on like a normal family. Mom prepared breakfast, familiar dishes like fried eggs with toasted bread or fragrant chicken soup. She cleaned the house thoroughly, asked about my work. "How were the meetings today? Are you tired?" I answered, smiling happily, trying to create a warm atmosphere. In the evenings, we had dinner together, watched TV. She told old stories about my childhood. I reassured myself, perhaps Mom just wants to be closer to me after years apart. She's older now, lonely in the countryside. The unease from the previous week gradually subsided, replaced by a feeling of warmth. But deep down, I still sensed something wasn't right. Mom rarely smiled genuinely, and her eyes sometimes looked distant. Until one afternoon, coming home from work, everything exploded. I stepped into the yard, exhausted after a long day of meetings, and stopped dead in my tracks. Before my eyes was a nearly 12-foot-high fence under construction, half-finished, completely blocking the boundary between the two houses. Gray concrete panels towered ominously, entirely obscuring the view to Mr. Roberts' house. Several workers were laboring busily, the hammering deafening, dust flying everywhere. I panicked and rushed into the house, unable to hide the surging worry and confusion. My heart pounding, I burst into the kitchen where Mom was standing. "Mom, what's happening in the yard? The wall? Why are you building such a high wall?" Mom calmly turned around, her voice even as if nothing was amiss. "I need a quieter space, son. Our house needs more privacy." I couldn't comprehend that reason, shaking my head vigorously. But the wall is only being built on the side adjacent to Mr. Roberts' house. Why? Nothing like this has ever been an issue before? I pressed further, my voice trembling with anger and concern. "Are you hiding something from me, Mom? Does it have to do with him?" But Mom offered no further explanation, just repeating, "It's necessary. I'm doing it for your own good." I realized I had no strong enough reason to object. Everything was handled by her, the expenses paid by her, the workers hired by her. Helpless, I silently watched the wall gradually take shape through the window. The concrete panels stacked high, soaring upward, completely blocking the neighboring house. My heart was filled with tangled questions, like a knotted mess impossible to unravel. For the first time, I felt that my mother was concealing something far more serious than what she had let on. Initial intuition? No, this was a decisive action, as if she were building a fortress to defend against an enemy. Mr. Robert, what had he done to my mother? Or was this secret bigger than I imagined? The next morning, I tried to push my questions aside. Work at the office was piling up, and I didn't want family matters to affect it. But on the way to work, I still thought about Mr. Robert. What would he think of that towering wall? It was like a silent declaration of war. In the afternoon, when I got home, I decided to take the initiative and ask him. I stepped into the yard, looking at the half-finished wall. There were still a few gaps large enough for me to call through. "Mr. Robert, I have something to talk about," I called, my voice slightly unsteady from nervousness. He appeared on the other side, his familiar tall and slender figure, silver hair under the afternoon sun. "Hello, Daniel. What's the matter?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "About the new wall. My mother had it built. You're not bothered by it, are you?" He looked at me for a moment, then smiled, his tone strangely composed. "It's fine, son. Let Mrs. Helen do whatever she wants. I understand." Not a word of complaint, not a hint of annoyance, just a patient smile and distant eyes. I stood there, waiting for him to say more, but he only nodded and turned away. That submissive attitude didn't reassure me. On the contrary, it made me even more confused. Why didn't he react? Anyone else would be angry, right? I went back inside, my heart full of doubts. Mr. Robert, what was he hiding? A few days after the wall was completed, my mother's actions became increasingly intense and uncontrollable. She seemed to have turned into a different person, resolute, uncompromising. Every time she encountered Mr. Robert in the yard or at the gate, she deliberately ignored him or displayed cold hostility, avoiding him as if he were an enemy. Once I saw her standing at the gate. Mr. Robert passed by and greeted her. She turned away sharply, not a word in response, her shoulders stiff. I stood nearby, embarrassed. "Mom, you shouldn't treat my neighbor like that." but she pulled me inside. "Come in, son, don't talk to him." Sometimes she even made veiled remarks, implying that he was not a decent person, making the atmosphere heavy. Like one afternoon when neighbor Mrs. Smith came over, my mother complained, "That man next door, he looks so shady. Who knows what he does alone in that house?" Mrs. Smith nodded curiously. I sat listening, my heart pounding, trying to interject, "Mom, Mr. Robert is good." But she glared at me. "You don't know." My mother began spreading less than flattering stories about Robert to the neighbors around us. Not directly, just dropping hints that he was dangerous and unpredictable. I overheard her telling the Jones couple across the street that he lived too reclusively, the type who always had something to hide. Words like that spread faster than I thought, quietly but persistently, like a bad wind through the neighborhood. Before long, I noticed people starting to look at Robert differently. The polite nods disappeared. Morning greetings became rare. Some people deliberately crossed to the other side of the street when they saw him. Once a neighbor pulled me aside and whispered, asking if Robert had any issues, saying that what my mother had told her didn't sound right at all. I stood there, not knowing how to respond, only feeling a simmering discomfort rising in my chest. I had to step in multiple times to explain and reassure everyone. "No, Mr. Robert is just private. He doesn't cause any trouble." But my words were like the wind. The rumors had spread, turning Robert into someone to be wary of in the neighborhood. He still went to the market, watered his plants, but now people avoided him. I felt sorry for him, but I didn't dare say anything to my mother. It didn't stop there. My mother continually found excuses to make things difficult whenever she had direct contact with Robert. She complained about the trees in his yard overhanging into ours, even though it had never been a problem before. "Those trees are encroaching on the roots. You have to cut them down," she called over the wall, her voice sharp. Mr. Robert just nodded. "All right, I'll uproot that tree." Then she filed complaints about dog barking, even though Robert only had one small dog, a cute fluffy pup that rarely made noise. "The barking keeps me from sleeping," she told me, then sent a complaint to the homeowners association. The complaints, even civil lawsuits, were sent by Helen with a frequency that left me stunned. Every week she drafted a new one, about strange noises, about trash, even though he was a very tidy person. I advised her many times to stop. "Mom, this is going too far. He hasn't done anything wrong." My voice trembled with worry. Helen replied, her eyes cold and sharp. "I'm just exercising my rights, son. It's not wrong or excessive. Don't interfere." I ran out of words to question her and fell silent, but what surprised me most was Robert's reaction to all of it. He never argued back, never disputed, never tried to clear his name with the neighbors. When he received the complaints, he just read them quietly and complied. He silently cut down the trees accused of encroaching, even though they had been there for years. The apple trees he had planted himself. I heard the sound of the saw echoing over the wall, my heart tightening. He had someone take the dog away, accepting a life alone in a house emptier than ever. No more cheerful barking, only silence. Every time my mother confronted or criticized him, those times she called him to the gate to talk, Robert just listened, nodded, and smiled. The look in his eyes toward her held no irritation or resentment, but something like affection mixed with regret. Like one time when Mom shouted over the fence, "Don't make noise anymore." He stood there, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry, ma'am." No excuses, no arguing. That very patience seemed to make Helen even angrier, her attitude growing more aggressive. The demands and actions targeted at Robert became more relentless, as if she wanted to push him to his limit. She sent more complaints, called homeowners association meetings, even threatened to take him to court for invasion of privacy. I stood in the middle, witnessing it all with growing bewilderment. I couldn't understand why Robert was always so yielding, accepting every unreasonable demand. Why didn't he get angry? Why didn't he defend himself? Nor could I understand why my mother hated him so much that she wouldn't let go. The unanswered questions began to pile up, signaling a major secret buried between these two people. The tension simmered on like that week after week. I tried to maintain a normal routine, morning coffee, work, evening TV, but the unease kept gnawing at me. Mr. Robert looked increasingly weary. His posture grew more stooped, his silver hair disheveled. I felt sorry for him, living alone, now shunned by the neighbors because of my mother's rumors. One Saturday afternoon, with a light drizzle falling, I decided to do something. I cooked a pot of hot chicken soup, the dish he had once praised when I shared some before, thinking that since he lived alone for so long and had looked tired lately, he might need a bit of warmth. It's just being neighborly, I told myself, trying to push my mother's words aside. I carefully packed the soup, stepped into the yard, my heart beating a little faster from nervousness. The high wall blocked the direct path, so I had to go around to the front gate and over to his house. I knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the damp air. No answer. I knocked again, still silence. A sudden feeling of unease rose, like a cold stream running down my spine. I called out to Mr. Robert, my voice slightly trembling, but there was no response. The door was unlocked. I hesitated for a second, then pushed it open and stepped inside, not out of curiosity, but genuine worry. The house was clean but empty, filled with the scent of old books mixed with an air of loneliness. I walked into the kitchen and froze on the spot. Mr. Robert was lying motionless on the floor, his body tilted awkwardly, one arm still reaching toward the table as if trying to grasp something. His face was pale, eyes half closed, breathing faint and labored. My heart pounded wildly, panic overwhelming me. "Mr. Robert, what's happened to you? Wake up!" I rushed over, kneeling down to check on him. He was still breathing, but very weakly. His consciousness was almost gone. He didn't respond when I shook him and called out. I immediately pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my voice frantic. "Someone has collapsed, possibly a stroke. He's lying motionless, breathing very weakly. The address is 124 Elm Street, Portland. Please come quickly." I described his condition urgently, providing the address and requesting emergency help. My mind was spinning. How could this happen? He lived alone. If I hadn't come over? Just minutes later, the sound of ambulance sirens pierced the street, cutting through my chaotic thoughts. Paramedics rushed in, quickly providing first aid, checking pulse, breathing, administering injections. They lifted him onto a stretcher and fitted an oxygen mask. Uneasy, I followed the ambulance to the hospital in a state of turmoil. Sitting in the vehicle, watching him lie motionless, I felt a deep sense of guilt. 5 years as neighbors, he had been good to me, and now this. What would Mom think? I called her from the ambulance. "Mom, Mr. Robert had a stroke. I'm taking him to the hospital." Her voice was silent for a moment, then she simply said, "Be careful, son." At the hospital, Robert was rushed straight into the emergency room. Doctors worked urgently, scans, IV fluids, cardiac monitoring. I sat in the hallway, waiting tensely, my hands clenched around my phone. Every minute felt like hours. Finally, the doctor emerged, his voice grave. "He suffered a severe stroke due to a cerebral blood clot. He's past the initial critical phase, but his condition is still very dangerous. Complications could arise at any time. Paralysis, heart failure, or worse." I nodded, my heart heavy. "Can I visit him?" The doctor agreed but warned, "Yes, but please keep it quiet." In the days that followed, knowing he lived alone, I stayed at the hospital, keeping vigil outside his room and handling necessary tasks even though I wasn't legally family. I bought water, washcloths, and even contacted the homeowners association to secure his house. Each time I visited, seeing Robert lying in the hospital bed, noticeably thinner, wrinkled skin, sunken eyes, my feelings of guilt and pity grew stronger. He gradually regained consciousness but was very weak, speaking haltingly. He whispered thanks to me, his voice trembling. I called my mother to update her in detail, unable to hide the worry in my voice. "Mom, he's very weak. The doctor says complications are possible." She was silent for a long time, then said, "Don't get too involved." But her voice sounded strange, not as harsh as before. A few days later, unexpectedly, my mother appeared at the hospital. She walked down the hallway looking tired but determined, her silver hair disheveled, eyes red from lack of sleep. By then, Robert could sit up with effort, speaking slowly but more alert. I was surprised. "Mom, what are you doing here?" She didn't answer, just looked at me and walked into the room. My mother stood at the bedside, gazing at Robert for a long time, her eyes interwoven with anger, pain, and something indefinable. Perhaps regret? She turned to me, silent for a long while as if battling internally, her hands gripping her bag strapped tightly. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, broken only by the beeping of the heart monitor. Finally, Helen let out a deep sigh, her face as if releasing a burden suppressed for many years. She sat down, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I can't hide it from you any longer. It's time you knew the truth." My heart pounded, anticipation surging. The truth about what? She looked me straight in the eyes, then turned to Robert. Robert is your biological father, the man who abandoned us when you were very young." Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. I was stunned, my mind reeling, limbs going limp. My biological father was Mr. Robert. How could that be? I looked at him, then at my mother, mouth agape, unable to speak. As my mother recounted the past abandonment, he left without a word, leaving me alone with a young child, no money, no support. Robert immediately bowed his head, his eyes avoiding mine, not daring to look directly. His face tensed, jaw clenched in undisguised remorse. His trembling hand rested on the hospital blanket, fingers weakly curling, clearly expressing helplessness and shame for what he had caused. She spoke of the years raising me alone in hardship, loneliness, and humiliation. When that man disappeared without explanation, I did every job, from laundry to street vending, just to put food on your table. Those nights crying alone, thinking about the future. Her voice choked, tears streaming down. Robert closed his eyes for a long time, as if unable to bear hearing the consequences of his departure all those years ago. A silent tear rolled down his cheek, but he didn't wipe it away, nor did he offer excuses. He simply let the torment show clearly on his aged face. The buried memories resurfaced with every word, making the hospital room heavy, the air thick and oppressive. I was overwhelmed by the truth just revealed, my mind spinning, limbs weak. I stood silently, feeling as if everything I had believed for over 30 years had collapsed in an instant. My biological father was Mr. Robert, the neighbor I had lived next to for 5 years, exchanging casual greetings, even sharing a few apples from his backyard. And he was my father? How could that be? I looked at him lying in the hospital bed, frail and weak, then turned to my mother, her face streaked with tears and exhaustion. My heart was in turmoil, torn between conflicting emotions. Heartache for the years my mother had endured alone, resentment toward him for abandoning us, and confusion about which side to take. I wanted to shout, to run out of the room, but my feet felt nailed to the floor. My mother wiped her tears, her voice trembling but resolute. "I've told you the whole truth now, Daniel. Nothing more to hide." She glanced at Mr. Robert, and he nodded faintly in confirmation, accepting whatever my reaction might be. His eyes offered no excuses. He just lay there silently, breathing weakly. She continued, "From this moment on, the decision whether to acknowledge this man as your father is entirely yours. I won't force you, son." Her words felt like yet another burden placed on my shoulders. A decision? How could I decide when everything was in such chaos? I looked at my mother, at her face deeply etched with fatigue and pain, the wrinkles around her eyes, her lips pressed tightly from years of bearing the load alone. She had sacrificed so much, raising me single-handedly without ever complaining. Then I turned to Robert lying in the hospital bed, him, my father, looking so fragile that it made my heart ache. Robert's eyes held no pleading, no pressure. They simply waited quietly, as if prepared for any outcome. He said nothing, just looked at me with profound remorse, as if saying, "Do what your heart tells you." In that moment, time seemed to stand still. I suddenly remembered my childhood growing up in absence, the days when my mother silently shouldered everything, I recalled those late afternoons when she came home after long shifts, drenched in sweat, yet still forcing a smile. "Are you hungry, son? I'll cook something quick." The late dinners, just the two of us, and the nights when she was exhausted but still pretended to be fine, reading stories to me even as her eyes stung with fatigue. I remembered the hesitant question I once asked about my father. "Where is Dad, Mom?" And how she would sadden, her voice quiet. "He's no longer with us, son." I gradually learned to swallow that question back, not wanting to see her hurt. Then I also remembered the past 5 years living next to Robert without knowing the truth, recalling his humility, his quiet nature, and the eyes that always carried a sense of remorse. The times he helped me fix plumbing, shared apples, or simply greeted me with a sad smile. Now I suddenly understood that Robert had chosen silence not out of indifference, but because he lacked the courage to face us, only wishing to live quietly near his son. He had watched me from afar, choosing the house next door to make amends in silence. Why hadn't he spoken sooner? Or was the remorse so great that he feared facing the present? Reality returned when I realized Robert's condition was still critical and could worsen at any moment. The heart monitor beeped steadily, reminding me that time waited for no one. After a long silence, I felt I had thought long and deeply enough for this irreversible decision. Anger, pain, but deep down I felt pity for him, my father. I turned to Robert, nodding slowly and decisively, and uttered the word Dad. It came from the bottom of my heart, awkward but sincere. All the pent-up emotions in Robert seemed to burst. Tears streamed down his aged face, his trembling hand reaching out toward me. My son," he whispered, voice choked with emotion. I stepped closer, embracing him tightly in an awkward yet deeply emotional hug. His warmth spread to me, the hospital smell mixed with his familiar scent of old books in the garden. I cried, tears soaking his gown, all the years of absence flooding back. My mother stood beside us, silently turning away, her eyes red, tears falling quietly. She said nothing, just stood there, witnessing the moment she had perhaps feared for years. In the days that followed, I stayed at the hospital caring for Robert, my father, attending to every small need from meals to rest. Early in the morning, I bought nutritious porridge from a nearby shop, feeding him spoonful by spoonful. "Eat, Dad, so you can get better soon." He smiled weakly. "Thank you, son." In the evenings, I sat by the bed, telling him about my daily work, about recruitment files. He listened, his eyes lighting up. "My son is so capable, Daniel." Those moments warmed my heart, though filled with anxiety. Would he fully recover? The doctors still warned of complications. My mother also visited frequently, bringing soup and light foods, stewed chicken broth or pre-cut fruit, placing them on the table and sitting for a while. She didn't speak much to him, only asking me, "Have you eaten? I'll bring more." The three of us were together in the hospital room, not needing many words, just quiet presence. The atmosphere was no longer tense as before, but gentler, though still heavy. I often caught my mother and Robert sitting near each other, not talking, not looking at each other for long, but without the former hostility. She sat on one side of the bed, he lay there. Their eyes sometimes met briefly before looking away. Once, when I stepped out to buy water and returned, I saw her wiping his hands, her movements gentle but strained. "Mom," I called. She startled. "He's weak. I'm just helping." Seeing that scene, I clearly felt the heaviness in my heart gradually easing, even though the old wounds couldn't vanish immediately. Anger lingered, but affection was seeping in, like a cool stream in the desert. Those days in the hospital felt like living in a separate world, where past and present blended together, filled with chaotic emotions. Every morning was the same. I woke up early, bought coffee from the lobby cafe, then sat beside my father, telling him trivial stories to cheer him up. "The weather is nice today, Dad. When you're better, I'll take you for a walk in the park." He smiled weakly. "I look forward to that too. A day when we truly reunite, not in circumstances like this." Mom would come, bringing fresh fruit, cutting it and placing it on the table. Eat something, son, to keep your strength up. She didn't look at Dad for long, but she no longer turned away immediately as before. Those small moments gave me hope. Hope that our family, though late, could heal. The fragile happiness after acknowledging my father had barely settled when just 5 days later, Robert's condition suddenly worsened due to complications from the previous stroke. The doctors had warned us, but when it happened, I was still unprepared. That morning, a light rain drizzled outside the hospital window, the damp air seeping into the room. I sat by the bedside as usual, holding Dad's hand, clearly feeling him weaken little by little. His skin grew colder, his breathing labored, the heart monitor beeping irregularly. "Dad, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling with worry. He opened his eyes, more alert than usual, holding my hand for a long time, gripping tightly enough that I could feel his final strength. "Daniel, listen to me. Take care of your mother. I'm proud of you." His words were brief but full of parting advice, as if he had prepared for this moment. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "Don't say that, Dad. You'll get better." But before I could call the doctor, Robert took his last breath right in my arms. He squeezed my hand one final time, then relaxed, his eyes closing peacefully. I froze, holding him tightly as all the pent-up emotions burst forth. Tears streamed down, but I didn't cry out loud, just choked sobs. My father, the man I had just reclaimed, had passed away right before my eyes. My heart ached as if being cut, filled with anxiety and despair. Why so soon? We had only just reunited, only begun to make amends. I held him, whispering, "Dad, don't leave me behind." The monitor's beep turned into a long tone, signaling cardiac arrest. Nurses rushed in, the doctor checked, but I knew. Dad was gone. My mother arrived shortly after, rushing to the hospital following my frantic call. She stood at the door, looking at Robert, who had breathed his last, her face turning pale. I thought she would be angry or perhaps relieved that the man she hated was gone. But no, there was no relief in her. Only an emptiness that could never be filled. She stood still, hands clenched tightly, eyes fixed on him with a complex expression, anger, regret, and sorrow. I called out to her, my voice faltering. She stepped forward, hugging me, but without tears. "I'm here with you. You don't have to bear this alone." Her voice was calm, but I could feel her trembling. After Robert's passing, the hospital briefly informed us that they needed to verify legal next of kin to complete the procedures. The doctor called me into his office, his tone professional. "In the records, Mr. Robert was once married and had a child, but the contact information is outdated. Do you know anyone?" I was stunned by the surprise, my mind reeling. Did my father have another family? I shook my head. "No, I don't know." Mom stood beside me, falling completely silent, her face no longer angry but filled with emptiness and bitterness, as if she finally realized that her pain over the years had never been the only story. She gripped my hand tighter but said nothing. We left the hospital in silence, hearts filled with anxiety. What other secrets were there? Not wanting to waste more time, I returned to Dad's house, a place already empty that now felt even more silent. Stepping inside, the scent of old books in the garden lingered, but the atmosphere was cold, as if his soul had departed. I sat down in the chair, sighed deeply, then began searching the house for any clues about the rest of Robert's life. I opened drawers, rummaging through old papers, bills, letters. In the nightstand drawer, I found an old family photo of Robert standing next to a woman and a young boy. He was smiling brightly, arm around the woman's shoulders, the boy looking about 10 years old. My heart pounded. Who were they? On the back of the photo was a handwritten phone number. I guessed it belonged to the woman in the picture. I stood there for a long time before dialing, my hands shaking, then telling myself I had no other choice. I needed the full truth. The call was brief but heavy. It rang a few times, then a middle-aged woman's voice answered. "Who is this?" I took a deep breath. "Hello, ma'am. I'm Daniel Klein, son of Robert Klein. He passed away this morning." The other end went silent, only heavy breathing audible. Then she said, "I'm Linda, his wife." She confirmed she was Linda, Robert's legal wife, currently living with their son in Sacramento, California, and that Robert had left their family exactly 5 years ago. He abandoned us without explanation, just like with Mrs. Helen, right? She asked, her voice full of bitterness. I was stunned. How do you know my mother? She sighed. He told me about her and you in the early years of our marriage. I never expected that you would call me. The call ended, but my heart felt heavier. My father had 2 families. He abandoned both. Before leaving the house, I accidentally discovered a carefully clipped stack of papers in the drawer. Inside were DNA test results bearing my name and Robert's. Positive, proving he was my biological father. I took the papers with me, realizing my father had quietly prepared for this truth beforehand, perhaps intending to reveal it but never getting the chance. My hands trembled, tears falling. Why did he hide it? Why live next to me without acknowledging it? I returned home, heart filled with anxiety and pain. Mom was waiting. I told her everything. She was silent, then cried, I never imagined he had another family. We hugged, but the atmosphere was heavier than ever. Robert's funeral was held at the local church, where he had lived and passed away in his final years. I handled everything, choosing the casket, funeral flowers, notifying neighbors. The mood was somber, with a light drizzle falling. Linda and her son Evan flew from Sacramento to attend, appearing before Daniel and Helen for the first time. I picked them up at the airport. The atmosphere among us was awkward and heavy. Linda looked about 55, slender, her eyes red as if she had just finished crying. Evan was around 28, tall, with a build very similar to our father's, but his eyes were full of wariness and suspicion when looking at me. Thank you for calling to inform us, Linda said, her voice cold. The funeral proceeded in a heavy and distant atmosphere. Daniel and Helen attended as close neighbors, quietly handling local arrangements, setting up chairs, distributing programs. Linda and Evan couldn't help but be suspicious of our attentiveness, their gazes lingering longer than usual on us, as if wondering, who are they really? But no one asked or questioned directly. My mother remained completely silent, offering no explanations, showing no excessive emotion, as if everything that needed to be said didn't belong in this moment. She stood at a distance, looking at the casket, her face pale. I stood beside her, clearly sensing the silent tension between the two sides, but choosing to avoid any confrontational glances. Evan looked at me a few times as if wanting to ask something, but then held back. The funeral ended in heavy silence, each side leaving in separate directions without farewells. Linda and Evan returned to their hotel. We went home. Mom and I left the cemetery with a sense of emptiness and a premonition that the unanswered questions would soon be raised. On the way home, Mom was silent. I drove with my mind spinning. Linda and Evan, my half-brother. Why did Dad abandon them to live next to me? This secret wasn't over yet. Not long after the funeral, about a week later, my mother and I received a call from the lawyer representing Robert. His voice over the phone was professional and detached. Mr. Daniel Klein, this is attorney James Harlan, representing Mr. Robert Klein. We need you and Mrs. Helen to be present at our office in Portland for the reading of the will. The appointment is tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. I froze, looking at my mother, who was sitting at the dining table. A will? Dad left a will? Mom turned pale, her hand holding the glass of water, trembling. I didn't know anything about a will. We agreed, but our hearts were filled with anxiety. My father, a man who lived discreetly and alone, had a will? What did he have to leave behind? A company? Assets? And what about Linda and Evan? Were they involved? That night I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, thinking about the meeting. Mom was the same. I heard her shifting through the wall. My mother and I arrived on time at the lawyer's office in downtown Portland. A modern glass building, but the atmosphere inside was as heavy as a courtroom. We stepped into the conference room and couldn't help but pause when we saw Linda and Evan already there, sitting on the opposite side of the long table. Linda was dressed in black mourning clothes, her face weary but sharp. Evan sat beside her, hands clenched tightly, eyes full of suspicion. Linda's gaze lingered on my mother and me longer than usual, as if she was beginning to realize that the relationship between us and Robert was not as simple as she had thought. Still, no one spoke up directly. Both sides maintained silence, but wariness was evident in every gesture. Evan gripped his mother's hand. I held my mother's tightly. The room's atmosphere charged like electricity. As the lawyer began reading the will, the tension in the room became thicker and heavier than ever. Mr. Harlan, a middle-aged man wearing glasses, spoke in a monotone voice. According to the will drafted and notarized 2 years ago. He read slowly, and each word felt like a bomb exploding. According to the contents, I was confirmed as Robert's biological son, and my mother was explicitly listed as his ex-wife, information presented in legal language that was undeniable. Linda startled, turning sharply toward us. Biological son and ex-wife? Evan gaped, his face flushing red. My heart pounded, anxiety surging. The truth was out. According to the will, I inherited 45% of the company's shares, including controlling voting rights sufficient to manage and direct the business operations. My mother inherited 25% of the company's shares, along with management of a separate financial portfolio including cash, bonds, and a long-term trust account. The will also clearly stated Robert's wish that I become the successor and run the company, viewing it as belated compensation for the years lost. Beyond the shares, I inherited full ownership of intellectual property, patents and trademarks that Robert had built, which had enabled the company's sustainable growth and expansion. A company? My father had a company? I was stunned, looking at my mother. She was equally surprised, her hand covering her mouth. The portion of the estate for Linda and Evan was specified as follows: 20% of the company's shares, insufficient for control, merely as financial shareholders. The villa in Sacramento where they currently lived. 10% of the remaining assets in cash to ensure long-term stability. As soon as the will's contents were fully disclosed, the room seemed to explode. Linda shot up from her chair, her face pale with anger, her voice high and sharp. This is absolutely unacceptable. The will is completely unfair. Why did he leave almost everything to them? Who are they anyway? On what legal basis? She pointed directly at us, her eyes bloodshot. Evan stood up too, jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on me. You say you're his son? He said, voice trembling but aggressive. Then what about all those years? We lived with Dad, what about you? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice calm. I didn't know of his existence until a few weeks ago. I had no idea who I was in his life. Evan let out a bitter laugh. How convenient. You knew nothing, and now you control everything. Linda turned to the lawyer, her voice nearly breaking into sobs. Are you sure my husband was of sound mind when he signed these papers? Or did someone influence him? The lawyer adjusted the files in front of him, responding briefly that the will was drafted when Robert was fully competent, with independent witnesses and proper notarization. Linda fell silent for a moment, then looked directly at my mother. Did you know he had another family? My mother finally spoke, her voice low and restrained. I only learned the truth when he was about to pass. The room quieted for a brief beat, enough for everyone to understand that the pain didn't belong to just one side. Mom gripped my hand tightly under the table. I knew that though this would drag on, this moment had etched itself deeply into all our memories. The lawyer intervened several times, trying to maintain a calm voice. Everyone's emotions are understandable, but the court only considers evidence and legality. Linda whipped around, laughing bitterly. Evidence? What about the years we lived with him? Doesn't that count as evidence? Evan looked straight at me, his voice lowered but icy. Do you know what it feels like to be abandoned? Or did you only learn about it when you got chosen? I wanted to say something, but my throat tightened. I just shook my head honestly. I was never chosen. I only just found out who I was. Linda shook her head repeatedly, tears welling up. It's too late. Everything is too late. The lawyer closed the file folder, his voice decisive. If there's nothing more, today's session ends here. Linda gripped Evan's hand tightly, pulling him to his feet. Before leaving, she turned back one last time, her eyes full of resentment. We won't let this end like this. The door slammed shut, leaving the room in silence, and I sat there, realizing that the will just read hadn't only divided assets, it had torn another family further apart. The conference room fell silent, broken only by heavy breathing. My mother and I stayed a little longer, neither saying a word to the other. The lawyer handed over documents. Here are the copies. The company is in the suburbs of Portland, specializing in software technology. I nodded mechanically, but my mind was in turmoil. On the way home, I clearly felt that the pain that hadn't yet subsided was now replaced by the weight of responsibility and the impending consequences. A company? Controlling rights? Would Linda sue? My heart pounded, anxiety surging. We returned home in silence, the rain falling heavier. I drove slowly, my mind reeling from the numbers and legal terms I had just heard. 45% shares, voting rights, patents. My father, Mr. Robert, a man who lived so discreetly that I thought he only had a small house and a few old books, turned out to own a valuable technology company. He had built it during the years he abandoned us and now left it behind as belated compensation. But what kind of compensation was it when it only caused more pain? When we got home, my mother went into her bedroom without dinner, the door closing gently but echoing like a whisper full of unease. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a cup of cold coffee, my heart filled with worry. Linda and Evan, they wouldn't let us be. I knew that for sure. In the days that followed, life felt suspended. I returned to work, but my mind couldn't focus. Colleagues asked, "You look tired, Daniel. Is something wrong with the family?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just some family matters." But inside I was waiting for a call from the lawyer, waiting for news from Linda. Mom was the same, speaking less, sitting by the window gazing at the high wall she had once built, her face pensive. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" I asked one evening as we ate dinner in silence. She shook her head. "I don't know what to do with that money. It's like a curse." Her words silenced me. The will had left us the majority, but it was also like a time bomb, waiting to be triggered from the other side. I looked up the company, a small enterprise specializing in cybersecurity software worth several $1 million with exclusive patents. Dad had built it quietly, keeping it hidden from everyone. Why didn't he tell us? Why leave this burden behind? A week after the will reading, the official lawsuit from Linda and Evan arrived by mail. I opened the envelope and read the dry legal lines. A request for the court to review the will's validity and inheritance rights, alleging it was influenced by external factors and unfairness. I wasn't surprised. I understood this confrontation was inevitable, just a matter of sooner or later. Linda and Evan had lost their father, their husband, and now most of the estate. They had every right to be angry. I called Attorney Harlan immediately. "They've sued us." He remained calm. "We'll prepare. The will is solid." Mom read the complaint, her face paling. I don't want to fight, son." But we had no choice. We had to face it. The trial was held at the Portland courthouse, an old dignified building, but the atmosphere inside was as tense as a crime drama. We sat on one side, Linda and Evan on the other, lawyers from both sides ready. The lawyer representing Robert, Mr. Harlan, confirmed that the will was drafted when he was fully competent and voluntary. He presented medical confirmation of mental health. Legal documents were submitted, including the DNA test results verifying I was Robert's biological son, conducted before his death. Harlan held up the papers. "This is irrefutable scientific evidence." Linda and her lawyer countered, "The will is unfair. He was influenced by his first son, abandoning his legal family." She recounted the 5 years Dad left, her voice trembling with pain. Linda's arguments gradually lost weight against the clear and valid evidence. Harlan refuted each point. No evidence of influence. The will was voluntary. The judge listened, taking notes. I sat beside Mom, hands clenched tightly, anxiously following along. Evan glanced at me a few times, his eyes full of resentment. Mom remained silent, her face pale. Finally, the court upheld the will's validity, recognizing my and Mom's inheritance rights. The will is legal. No grounds for invalidation. The judge's words rang out, but no one applauded. Linda cried. Evan slammed the table. We won, but why did it feel so heavy? My mother and I left the courtroom in silence, feeling no joy or victory, just an indescribable emptiness. On the way home, Mom whispered, "We won. But why does it feel so sad, son?" I shook my head. "Because we're taking from them, Mom." Back home, we sat for a while without eating or drinking. The anxiety eased, but remorse rose. A few days later, when things had temporarily calmed, the media briefly reported on the inheritance dispute. Mom took the initiative to talk to me about the inherited assets. She sat at the kitchen table, her voice serious. "Daniel, I've thought a lot about the will. I want to redistribute a portion to Linda and Evan." I listened, my heart lightening. She continued, "No matter how painful it was, they weren't the ones who made the mistakes in the past. Your father was wrong, not them." I listened and agreed immediately because I didn't want to build my life on others' losses. "I agree, Mom. We'll make it fairer." The two of us proactively arranged to meet Linda and Evan. I called, my voice hesitant. "Mrs. Linda, we'd like to meet to talk." She hesitated but agreed. The meeting was at a neutral cafe in Portland. The initial atmosphere was tense. Linda and Evan sat across from us, faces cold. When they heard the proposal to redistribute assets, we offered an additional 15% of shares and a portion of the finances. Linda and Evan were stunned, unable to hide their surprise. "Why would you want to redistribute?" Linda asked, her voice trembling. Evan looked at me. "Why would you do this?" There was no more arguing or resentment. The meeting's atmosphere became quieter and more honest. We talked for a long time, sharing our pain. The two women spoke to each other for the first time with belated apologies, not to erase the past, but to close the hatred. Mom looked at Linda. "I'm sorry for what he did to you. I hurt just like you." Linda cried. "I'm sorry too. He abandoned both of us." Evan and I exchanged glances that were different, no longer confrontational but cautious understanding. "I don't know what to say," I said. Evan nodded. "We brothers both suffered because of Dad." The meeting ended in gentle silence, each side leaving separately. Though it couldn't yet be called reconciliation, a fragile bond had been kindled, opening hope for a less burdensome new beginning. On the way home after that meeting, I drove slowly, letting my mother sit beside me in quiet thought. She gazed out the window, hands tightly gripping her bag strap, but her face was no longer as tense as before. The rain had stopped, and the afternoon sun filtered through the clouds, casting golden streaks of light onto the streets of Portland. I clearly felt a sense of relief creeping in, though my heart still held some anxiety. Would Linda and Evan truly accept it? Could we build something from these ashes? When we got home, my mother smiled, a rare one. "Today was better than I thought, son." I nodded and hugged her. "Yes, Mom. We did the right thing." That night I slept better than I had in days, though dreams still lingered with images of my father. He smiled from afar, as if watching over us. After that meeting, life for my mother and me gradually returned to a normal rhythm, free from legal tensions or simmering confrontations. Calls from the lawyer dwindled and the lawsuits became part of the past. We began planning for a new beginning. I quit my old job, the HR specialist position now just a memory, to focus on my father's company. Mom agreed. "Follow his wishes, son. I'll support you." We moved to a new house near Robert's company headquarters as a way to start anew in a place tied to the present and future. The house was more spacious, with a small garden in the back, located in the suburbs of Portland, close to the cybersecurity software company my father had built. We chose it for its convenient location, just a 10-minute drive from the office, and for its peaceful atmosphere with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. Moving was an emotional process. I packed our belongings, looking back at the old house with its chaotic memories. The old house, with its high fence separating the two families, was left behind, not demolished but remaining as a silent reminder of the misunderstandings, resentments, and silences of the past. I stood looking at it one last time before handing the keys to the new buyer. The towering gray concrete wall still stood there, blocking the view to the neighboring house. It had once been a symbol of division that my mother built in anger, but now it was just a relic, reminding me of those months filled with anxiety and worry when secrets gradually came to light. "Do you regret that house, son?" Mom asked as we drove away. I shook my head. "No, Mom. That's the past. We need to look forward." She nodded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. I officially took over the management of the company in accordance with my father's wishes, step by step getting accustomed to the new role and its responsibilities. The early days at the company were truly challenging. I walked into the office, meeting the old leadership team, people who had worked with my father. "So this is what young Daniel looks like? Mr. Robert mentioned you," the technical director said, voice surprised. I sat in meetings, listening to revenue reports and product development plans. The company specialized in cybersecurity software with exclusive patents on data encryption, my father's legacy. I didn't know much about technology, but I learned quickly, reading documents day and night, seeking input from employees. Anxiety surged in those first days. Can I really shoulder this role? This is a multi-million-dollar company and I'm just an HR specialist. But gradually I adapted, signing new contracts, meeting partners, feeling the weight, but also the excitement. I didn't work alone. I had Evan's support, and the two of us slowly built a partnership based on respect and shared goals. After the asset redistribution meeting, Evan called me. "Bro, I've been thinking about the company. I have software experience. Can I help you?" I was surprised but agreed immediately. "Come here. Let's do it together." Evan flew up from California and began joining meetings with me. He offered ideas, sharing technical insights that I lacked. At first, things were awkward. He hadn't fully let go of his anger, and I carried an indescribable sense of guilt. But over time, we talked more, not just in meetings, but during after-hours chats. Evan handled technical aspects. I managed strategy, a perfect combination. The company grew steadily and thrived, not through possessive ambition, but through joint effort and the transparency I always believed in. We signed new contracts with major firms, revenue increasing 20% in the first quarter alone. My mother stepped back, not deeply involving herself in business matters, instead focusing on her own emotional well-being. She planted flowers in the new garden, read books, and even joined a local yoga class. "I'm getting old. I shouldn't meddle in you kids' affairs." She laughed when I asked for her opinion, but she still supported me, cooking dinner and waiting for me to come home. "How's the company, son?" I told her, and she listened, eyes bright. She and Linda occasionally met, no longer in confrontation, just two women who had endured similar wounds, sitting together to chat and listen. It started over the phone. "Mrs. Linda, how have you been?" Then in person when Linda visited Portland. We invited them for dinner. The two women sat apart, sharing past stories. "He once promised me," Linda said. Mom nodded. The same with me. No tears, just calm sharing. I observed from afar, heart warmed but anxious. Had they truly moved past it? The relationship between the two families gradually became more natural, unforced, without needing labels. No more lawsuits or resentment, just occasional check-in calls. On weekends, the two households often met for dinner. The atmosphere simple and peaceful, without the former distance. The first time at our house, we ate Mom's cooking, roast meat and salad. Linda complimented, "Mrs. Helen's cooking is wonderful. It's delicious." Evan and I talked work. The mothers chatted casually. No loud laughter, but cozy. The next time at a hotel when they visited, we ate seafood and shared old photos. I watched the two mothers converse, realizing the serenity on their faces was something they had paid dearly for over many years. They had once indirectly hated each other through my father. Now they sat together, listening like old friends. Looking back on the journey, I understood that no matter how painful the truth, it must be faced, for only then can resentment passed from one generation to the next be ended. Those months of anxiety from Mom's visit, the wall, the stroke, the will, the lawsuit, now felt like a long film. I sat alone in the company office looking at Dad's photo on the desk, reflecting. I realized that the mistakes of those who came before don't have to become burdens for those left behind if people have the courage to choose forgiveness. My father was wrong, but I chose to forgive, to share. For me, the greatest asset wasn't in the shares or management rights, but in not letting the past define who I am. I was grateful for life, not because all wounds had healed, but because those involved had learned to live with them. One weekend evening, we met again, sharing dinner, talking and laughing without the former awkwardness. Not perfect, but enough. The future still held many unknowns, but this time I believed we would be okay.